very happy to be joined by this gentleman because it's been too long since we've done this. It's Bill Trinen, Director of Product Marketing at Nintendo of America. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time. I'm happy to be here.
So 3DS.
Yes.
Obviously, yeah, the Wii U did come out last year, but we're focusing on the new 2-year-old handheld device. Why suddenly this big emphasis on the handheld?
Well, I think obviously from our perspective, we're looking at the announcements this morning, 15 new games that we've talked about in Nintendo Direct that are coming out very soon. Really great lineup. Brand new Zelda game announced today. Our feeling is that overall 3DS, this is the year for the system. It started with Fire Emblem, Luigi's Mansion, we've got Lego City coming, and then just a whole slate of amazing games. And I mean, personally, I love handheld gaming, and I don't know that I've seen kind of a lineup that's got as much depth and quality in it as we've got for 3DS this year.
I think both in variety and in quantity, it's quite impressive. Why 2 years in? I mean, there have been a lot of talk that there wasn't as strong a software lineup when the 3DS launched. This is kind of, I think, what a lot of people had wanted to see, or even maybe sort of a quarter of what we're seeing coming out in 2013. Is this because it just took that long to get the products done and made?
Well, I think partly whenever you launch a new system, there's always a question of what can you get ready for launch, and then there's the question of how can we really leverage the system to do things that are new and unique. And we've seen sort of with 3DS the system kind of evolve over the last 2 years. And we started sort of with we had games like Ocarina of Time 3D. We had some kind of unique ideas like Steel Diver, and then we've also seen games like Super Mario 3D Land, which clearly was designed to take advantage of what the 3DS system can do. But really, we're kind of getting into that period where the developers are really getting to know the system, and they're bringing some really great ideas. And I think particularly this year, it started with Fire Emblem, and it continues with Fire Emblem with all of the DLC maps that are coming. But to me, what I'm really excited about are first and foremost Animal Crossing, because I'm a huge fan of that series, and I cannot wait.
I understand. I just giggle. The two grown men are getting excited about Animal Crossing.
I know, and I'm like, all I can wait for is the day when I see that little icon on my 3DS installed in there, because I want it on the system. I'm just going to play it constantly all the time. But then, of course, the Zelda game that we announced today is one that I'm really excited for, because that really leverages the 3D in ways that it takes the familiar 2D gameplay of Zelda, but it adds a whole new feel to it with the way that it's using the 3D and the elevation and the depth, and it really forces you to kind of rethink the structure of the world. It's really cool.
Now, the new Zelda game, which is, I think, unnamed now in terms of its subtitle,
right.
But it does take place in the universe of Link to the Past. Arguably one of the most heralded, if not the most heralded, of all the Zelda games. Why now go back to such a classic franchise? I would have to say, in talking with some of the younger people that I now work with, this game resonates with the two of us, but it doesn't hold the same place as, say, Ocarina does. Why so much time has passed? Go back to Link to the Past.
Well, I think one thing is you go back and you look at the way that they originally designed the game world in A Link to the Past, and in that game they evolved the sort of flat world of the original Legend of Zelda on NES, and they built this multi-tiered world. It had mountains, it had cliffs, it had caves and whatnot, and there was elevation within the game world. And I think that as soon as we released Nintendo 3DS, Mr. Miyamoto really wanted to revisit that world and see how can the 3D visuals breathe new life into the ideas they had when they created that game. And then kind of coupling that with the new mechanic where Link's able to merge with the walls and run along the walls. I think today in the hands-on, people got a sense of how that works within the dungeons. But then when you take that same mechanic and you apply it in the overworld, in a world that you're familiar with, but you've thought about in a very specific way in terms of how the paths connect, now you've got to start thinking about how the walls connect and where they lead to, and how you could leverage a mechanic like that. It makes for, I think, a pretty exciting new way to play that game.
And Mario and Luigi have returned in another one of those. I found with that franchise, when I'm writing a review of it, trying to explain the story, just I'm like, this is embarrassing. What is kind of, I was going to ask you, what's kind of the kernel, outside of the absurdities, what's kind of the kernel of that of that franchise? Because it is quite distinct from any of the other Mario or Luigi properties.
Well, it is, and if you were to go back and play the original, which was Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga on Game Boy Advance, you can go through that game and look at the names of characters and places in that game. They are all based on a word that describes laughter. That's both in the Japanese version, and we localized that as well into the English version. The development team that creates this series, from the get-go, for them it's not just a Mario and Luigi kind of RPG, action RPG adventure. For them, this was a comedy adventure. And I don't think you see that much in games, and partly that's why it's so hard to describe, is because they are amazing at coming up with hilariously ridiculous plot twists, like going inside Bowser's belly, or in this case, going into Luigi's dreams, where Luigi is super amazing.
When I was playing it, I could definitely see the 3D. It was actually quite effective in that sense of depth. Because it is such a silly game, I'm curious how that might be manipulated. We might be seeing something closer to Super Mario 3D World in terms of it being very important to the game design and the mechanics and the puzzles.
Well, they're actually using 3D. They're both using 3D and not using 3D in a variety of different ways. But particularly where they wanted to kind of draw out the 3D effects was in the battle scenes, and so you see a lot of, particularly with kind of the bro moves, when you combine to do those, you'll see a lot that are using the depth of the battlefield there. And then also when you get to sort of what we're calling the Luiginary attacks, which are the attacks that use Luigi's imaginary powers. It's a fantastic new word, Luiginary.
I know. It's great. Like, all these people are just writing it down, you're going to read it. I have to figure out a way to say them out loud, as do you.
But those, particularly when you're in battles, they've really done a lot to leverage the 3D depth. But there are other points in the game where you actually won't use the 3D visuals as much. The overworld, which is taking place on Pillow Island, is sort of that kind of slightly isometric view. You've got a little bit of a sense of 3D there, but then when you go into the dream world, that's more side-scrolling platformers. They do leverage it a little bit, particularly when Luigi is using some of his powers there to, you tweak his nose and he blows the stuff forward towards the foreground of the environment. But they're a really creative team, both on the comedy side and also on the gameplay side. So.
There was some talk at the beginning where we were presented with sort of sales figures, especially as they pertain to the digital purchases, and they were higher than I would have thought, although I found myself buying more and more that way as well. It was kind of shown in contrast to what's happening with these emerging platforms, especially iOS and Android. There's always been a lot of talk about whether or not Nintendo can survive against that. Curation seemed to be the primary argument, that the level of quality, in contrast to the lack of quantity, that's at the iTunes store. I mean, is that something that you guys are willing to double down on, or do you see the threat that's coming from phone devices?
Well, I think what's interesting is people have always been talking to us about, what is the future for handhelds, and this has been going back, 10 years. 10 years ago, people were talking about, cell phones, and isn't Game Boy Advance going to have a hard time? They said it with DS. Isn't DS going to have a hard time? And we heard it with 3DS. What I think is really interesting is actually what's been happening in Japan over the last roughly year or so. Japan was a little bit slower on the uptake with smartphones, but they've had a big boom over the last year. And in particular, you see adult females purchasing smartphones. But what we're also seeing simultaneously is that is the exact same audience that's been buying 3DS to play Animal Crossing. And so within this environment where you have this very one particular group of people who is thinking, I want a smartphone, I'm going to buy a smartphone, at the very same moment they're saying, I have to play this game and I'm going to buy a 3DS to do it. And really what that says to us is sort of what we've always said, which is software sells hardware, and if you've got great software, people are going to come to the platform and they're going to play it. Certainly on the digital side of things, particularly 3DS has had a really good string of unique content that's been available digitally from independent developers, as well as from some of our own teams. And things like the Push Mo and Crash Mo games, obviously Harmonite, which just came out. We've even got Mario and Donkey Kong coming, and that's going to be a digital-only game, and that's particularly It's a great little puzzle game, but again, it has, I think, a unique kind of depth of gameplay and a unique precision of control that 3DS offers that I think you have a hard time replicating on other systems. But I even go back further than that, and there's been such a string of digital content with things like Sakura Samurai even that people kind of forget about, and they think, oh yeah, there was that game, but it's been pretty consistent now. So personally, I mean, I'm really excited about it because we're getting both, the quality games from Nintendo. You can buy those digitally, plus we're getting the unique digital content, and we're having a really steady flow. So I'm excited about it.
Back when we first met, a very, very long time ago, I had hair. I was young. You looked the same. You were doing a lot of localizing. You're Miyamoto's translator. Now you're in marketing, and so I have an opportunity to ask some questions that, as you just described, all this great digital content. There really are a lot of games available to the 3DS. How do you let an audience know about that? I mean, this is obviously a challenge that many indie developers are having just on an iOS platform, but how do you reach that audience? They're so diverse, and they're out there. And obviously, I'm not watching all television or all things. I rarely do see Nintendo ads for a 3DS game.
Well, we do. We're advertising 3DS quite a bit, but in terms of specifically the digital content, where we're finding a lot of opportunity is in things like Nintendo Direct. It's a way for us to talk directly to the fans. A lot of times, we're trying to get them to go right to the eShop to find games that are available there. A key thing for us, though, really is about having that eShop right there on the home screen where people can go in and see what's new. And certainly because, we're really focused on curating a good collection of quality content, it, I think, makes it easier for people to see what's new, see what's fresh, and find other interesting things in there. So to me, it really comes down to, how can we support the digital content through the activity that we generally do, but how can we simultaneously keep people coming into the eShop where they're going to be more likely to discover these?
I think my final question is 2013. We are expecting 2 new consoles to come out at the end of the year, but there's a lot of talk. Can we survive? I mean, there's doomsayers in all corners of the game industry. But for Nintendo, what are some of the key challenges that you guys are faced with as we go into 2014?
It really does come all the way back down to the content, and certainly on 3DS with the lineup that we have, I think it's going to be a huge year for the system, and I'm excited. There's so many different games with, from Donkey Kong to Animal Crossing and whatnot. Obviously on Wii U, we showcase some of the content that's coming. We're working on it diligently, and what I love about Nintendo is that Mr. Miyamoto is so passionate about making sure that the games that we release are of the highest quality possible. And that's what we're going to see with Pikmin 3. It's what we're going to see with New Super Luigi U, which is fantastic. And you're going to go hands-on at E3 with a number of other games that are coming for Wii U that we've hinted at in some of the Nintendo Directs. So there's a ton of content coming, and it's going to be fantastic. And as we always see, I think once it's there, people are going to come and play the system.
All right, I have to get these muscles going. Yeah. It's going to be very busy.
Ton of content. I'm excited.
Bill, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.